Good morning. This is Jason Dean here, coming at you live again from Film Fanatic headquarters. This is the day after Christmas. I hope Santa Claus treated everybody really well, and hopefully nobody got any coal in their stockings. I was more nice than naughty this year, although naughty is pretty good sometimes to be naughty. So, yeah, Santa was amazing to me as always. This year is no exception. I got a bunch of cool gifts from Santa Claus. Yes, I still believe in Santa Claus. The I got a couple of really great vintage movie posters. For, Friday the 13th, the original one. I got the original print, and I got a nice frame for it. So I'll be hanging that up soon. Pretty excited about that. I also got the original print from George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, the original artwork. So cool. The thing too about posters, I went to a horror convention for the first time this year, and it was cool. It was a little bit disappointing. I mean, with the amount of stuff that they had to sell, one of the biggest things that was going on, obviously, as much of a nerd as I am, and as much of a film fanatic as I am, and movie fanatic. I'm always surprised that I haven't been to any conventions before. It's because I know it's a regular thing for people who are into film, and especially around horror films. Like conventions are a big thing. Like that's a big, it kind of keeps, to a degree, it keeps the industry going, especially with like the more obscure underground exploitation movies that I cover a lot. A lot of those guys are in that field, so there's a real thing where they keep in touch with their loyal and rabid fan base. But it also encompasses obviously all things horror. But it was pretty good. They had a lot of vendors, and there was a lot of the vendors had where they're selling a lot of poster art and artwork based off of iconic horror movies, and a lot of the stuff was centered on, especially around the posters. They were kind of more like more modern artist renderings of the original print, like say Halloween or The Exorcist or whatnot. And they're pretty good, but you can't beat the classic artwork, especially from films from the 80s and 70s. You just can't beat it and beyond. They There wasn't very much of a thing on there's basically only one booth in the whole place that had, and it was huge, but they had like the real deal posters. They had all the original artwork. I got a bunch of posters there. I got Lucio Fulci's Zombie. I got the original print, which is amazing. I still have yet to hang any of these posters up. I got the original print for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I think a few others. Very very cool. But a lot of the other things were like they were kind of like knockoffs, and they were, I don't know, they were kind of cheaply made, and they looked like they were just kind of printed off. They were okay, and I was also surprised too, being that I'm a huge collector of films. I was surprised they didn't have any movies. Maybe it's something I'm not aware of, but I've always assumed that a lot of these conventions, obviously people who are avid collectors of movies like I am, go to those kinds of things, and you expect that there's going to be tons of movies to buy, DVDs, Blu-rays, 4Ks, especially now with that industry being pretty popular. But they didn't have any. They didn't have any. No Blu-rays to be found. Not even DVDs. It was kind of, and especially 4K. They None of that stuff was anywhere. I was really surprised. The only area where they had one little booth there that was selling movies, but it was the only place in the whole convention where they were selling movies, and they were selling like original copies of VHS tapes, which I thought was pretty cool. Like they had all like basically the first editions of like the Nightmare on Elm Street films, all the classic you know horror films from the 80s. more of the well-known, they had more of the well-known franchises, Friday 13th, and they had the original VHS tapes, and they were all like in their, in the wrapping, so they were, worth some money. Some of them were cheap, some of them were fairly expensive, but that was it, and they didn't have a huge selection. It was kind of disappointing. But the posters that I got for Christmas from Santa Claus were the original from the original movie prints. So I'm all about that. You can't beat that. To me, it always goes back to, again, being a kid and going through the aisles, in the days of VHS and seeing the glorious artwork. Like that's where it's at to me, and especially all the great horror exploitation movies. I mean, that's where it was. That's my bread and butter, and that's one of the things that I think makes it into, or what qualifies using the term of exploitation, because a lot of these guys, they were competing with big budget studio films, so they had to really think about being creative and how to market, and they were all market guys, and they say they were always trying to come up with the coolest artwork and packaging so it would grab your attention, and you'd see it on the shelf and you'd be like, oh wow, that looks amazing, and so it was a lot of love and care was put into the artwork for that time, for those decades. You don't really see that so much now. It's all really focused on marketing now for newer horror films, is all kind of around the trailer. And there's a lot of trailers that, unfortunately, I feel give away too much for films, and it's a little bit disappointing. Once in a while, though, you do come across a trailer, and there have been a few trailers that I've seen recently for some newer horror films that are very good, and they leave you with questions. There's no answers in the trailer. You know, um, there's no plot reveals, and that's a problem with a lot of newer trailers. But basically, like I said, there are some really great ones and that are very effective. But really, the whole shift from, I think, from say those decades of like the 70s and 80s to about now, it's not really about the artwork, the poster artwork anymore, because that's wicked old school, and it's not something you see on the shelf. It's all centered on the trailer and word of mouth, the and marketing everything, online, obviously. So it's very different. But I love those classic posters because you have that vintage kind of pulp attraction. It has that pulpy feel, and everything pops. All the colors pop, and especially any of the 80s slasher films, and then even more so with any of the foreign exploitation movies that came out, particularly with Italian cinema. I mean, just amazing, just incredible. The other thing I got from Santa Claus, which was really awesome, was I got a really sweet, pretty huge gift certificate to my favorite place right here at Bull Moose Music, of which I'm going to go to today. So I'm super excited. It's funny because I was just in there on Thursday. I went in because I had ordered some stuff for my folks, a couple of movies for them that weren't there, and I had to order. So, and I ordered another. I had ordered some an album for myself too, and I went there on Thursday, and I picked up a couple other things for Christmas, and then I bought myself a couple of movies, and the movie that I got for my dad had come in, so I picked it up there. But the album that I ordered wasn't coming in until today, so kind of funny. But I remember when I paid for the stuff, I was talking to the clerk, the guy who was waiting on me, and he was going through my movies and he was going through my purchases, and he's like, "Oh," he was like, "Yeah." He gave me like a thumbs up. He's like, "Yeah, that's cool. Like I dig it." But that's part of the thing that I love about going to actual physical places, is like you have that interaction, and they can like give you a heads up of whether something exists, and if you dig it, they might give you a thumbs up, or you get some feedback. You have that interaction, and I love that. You can't get that online. So, that's just how I am. I'm a curmudgeon old man. But he was like, yeah, good selection. Thumbs up. I was like, yep, cool. And then I said to him when I paid for the stuff, I said, I'll probably see you in a few days because, uh, you know, fingers crossed, I'm probably getting, a gift certificate from Santa Claus. So it's my favorite place, and so I'll probably see you in a couple of days. And here I am. So pretty funny. I hadn't been to Bull Moose. I was going in the fall and in the summertime, late summer, fall period of this year. I was going up there more often, and I was buying some. I was having some pretty good. Uh, I had a little bit extra cash. I was, making some pretty good hauls of some new films. So I bought. I've been buying. I had bought a ton of new movies, and then there was a big lull where I wasn't. I had been obviously watching a lot of the stuff I've been buying and digging into that because that's been really great. But as far as buying newer things, it's been a little while. So I'm super excited. And then the other day, I bought some new movies that I watched that were just awesome, and I just did a couple of shows on them. So I I'm really excited about buying a new kind of combo of different exploitation movies. The other thing too, I was watching I came across this podcast or a YouTube channel where the guy's show is basically centered on, where they interview a lot of these great companies that release a lot of these films, like Synapse and Blue Underground and Severin and Vinegar Syndrome, all these great companies that release all these great exploitation movies. And it was cool. It was really an eye opening thing. But one of the things that was surprising, but then not at the same time, was they were saying that they kind of feel that market for what they do is going to dry up within 5 years because it's small, but the fans and people who are into it, like myself, are rabid, and they're really loyal, and they, will spend a few extra bucks for those particular movies or for those editions because to a degree they're limited, and so there's a lot of love and care put into that work for putting these movies out. But he also the one of the guys that the one of the guys who runs Synapse, which is a company that's been around for quite a few years. They emerged out of actually the VHS days, and they specialize in all the great classic exploitation movies. And they were saying how they think within 5 years those companies might not exist, but we'll see. I think there's enough of a cult following that there will always be a demand for it. I think it's always going to be a weird ebb and flow around how people seek out content, of music and movies that they love. I think fans will always, those people will always be there, but the way, the form of that will probably shift and change all the time. But I think that's the same thing. I mean, I think with films, I mean, you look through the ages, you see how dramatically have shifted and changed, say, within the last 10 to 20 years. And I've seen it, I mean, just within 4 years, just dramatic shift, as far as how people access and acquire music, and then how people do the same for film. Whether it becomes a thing of where it's purely streaming, or whether it becomes a thing of where people go to shops like Goodwill and buy used content, or they go to places to they order everything online, where they go through the companies directly, or they use the big monstrous companies like Amazon, or they go to places like Bull Moose and buy you know new editions of unopened or unused packages, or in their case, Bull Moose has both used and unused. And also people who just don't really buy music, but what they do is they just stream everything for free, and they listen to things on their phone, or they download it to their phone and they just use it that way. So there's all of these different formats, and it's always changing, and it's shifting. But I think at the end of the day, the core base of people, and and then also with records, albums. I mean, albums has become this whole big retroactive thing again. But at the end of the day, I feel even though that from a technological standpoint, everything is shifting and changing rapidly all the time. There's still that I feel like that audience is still there. The people who have a real extreme thirst for media is still there. I think it's just they access it differently, and things are shifting constantly. But I feel like that audience is still there for the most part, and I don't really feel like that part of it has changed. People's habits change a lot, and people are easily persuaded by the newest ways or the easiest ways to access things, but and also the most inexpensive ways. But I feel at the end of the day, there's still that audience that is hungry for content. So I don't know. It's hard. I don't see it ever going away. It's just going to be a different thing, a different model to a degree, and maybe there isn't a model anymore. And the other thing too that I talk about on a lot of these shows where I really hear a lot of negative things around it, or around the subject of that there's not a lot of good new movies, particularly horror movies. There's been a lot of that kind of thing, especially from people who I like and I respect, but kind of add to this thing of where there's not really, which I think in the long run, like people can have their opinions, but I think it does affect the industry as far as keeping people away from the theater. I think that's a big thing. I think it does have a ripple effect on it, especially with say people who have a huge clout, or have a huge following. Like one person, I feel like someone like Chris Gore, he has a lot of clout. He's a very well known, respected person in the film industry. He's mostly does reviews, but he really he carries that flag quite a bit and waves that flag quite a bit as far as that there's not any really good films, and he kind of makes it a career. Although I like a lot of his work and I agree with a lot of his work, he seems to now like make a career out of basically saying that there's nothing good coming out and doesn't really give things props as far as new content. And I think that does, I think he has a huge audience, and it does cause an effect, have a cause and effect. And I think it in the big scheme of things that can affect people's habits. But he's obviously he can say whatever he wants to say, but I think it does have a ripple effect on possibly, preventing people from going to the theater. They'll say, well, I don't want to spend that money on this movie because I heard it's not so great, so I'm gonna get it, really cheap online, and just watch it on my at home and not spend the extra buck or bucks to see it in the theater. So it does have an effect, but I believe in the opposite. I really feel that there's a lot. I've seen so many great films, particularly around newer horror films in the last year that have been and also within the last couple of years, but particularly this year, I've seen some really great horror films, and I don't usually, New Year's is approaching. A lot of folks are doing their top 20 or top 10 lists. I'm probably not going to do that kind of show because that's a lot of well, it's a lot of work in regards for me because my taste, and if I put things in say a formal order, they tend to shift a lot, and I don't. So it's hard to say. More so overall, like films of all time, that's might be a little bit easier for me. But I like a lot of different things, so things are always kind of shifting. So as far as nailing that kind of a thing in concrete seems a little bit too taxing for me. But that being said, I figure I'd mention some movies that I've seen lately that have just been really great. I think Ty West, I think he is one of the best directors right now. I've been following his career for a long time, but I think for a director to put out two really fantastic movies all in the same year is pretty miraculous. X, tremendous, tremendous old school slasher film. Pearl, I think, is a phenomenal movie, the prequel to it, and now there's going to be. It was announced that Maxine, which is the third one, is going to be coming out too, but I don't think that's going to come out. It would have been cool to see it come out really soon, but I think it got pushed up for some reason, so it might be a year or two. But tremendous movies, tremendous, tremendous films. I thought those were really fantastic. Another film that I really liked a lot is Alex Garland's Men. I thought that was really great. He's a really awesome director. He's one of my favorites. Ex Machina. He's probably most well known for. Um, Annihilation. Such a great movie, but very cool movie. Very very creepy. Very atmospheric. Another film I thought was really tremendous was The Black Phone with Ethan Hawke, Scott Derrickson, who also made Sinister. Black Phone, I think, is a tremendous movie. Highly suspenseful, super creepy horror film. And again, that movie has a real 70s. It's shot. It's the story takes place in the 70s, so it has a very 70s vibe, which I'm all about that. Really great movie. Um, the Northman, Robert Eggers, that came out this year. I think that's a really awesome movie. I'm surprised I don't hear that movie being talked about more. I mean, it's not a horror film per se, but who really cares? I think it does. It's a Viking movie, and it does have horror elements to it, and it is brutal as all hell, and it's very dark. Ethan Hawke is in that also, but I haven't really heard that movie being mentioned anywhere, and I think that's a really great movie. That's an awesome movie, and I kind of would almost put that in that list because it's so dark. Almost in the horror list, but really great. There's yeah, there's been a lot of really really cool movies. I've been really impressed. And last night I rented a movie. Actually, I went to Opera House Video a couple days ago. Got some movies. Usually, what we do around Christmas time and my folks is Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, Christmas night, Christmas Day night. We we watch movies. We do the dinner thing and do the gifts thing, and we sit around and watch a ton of movies and stuff. So that's always been a tradition for me, for years. And I got some new movies at Opera House Video, and one new movie which I had only heard. I saw a review of it. It came up in a review that I saw from this girl who goes under the name of Spooky Astronauts. She's an Australian YouTube woman, and she's really great. She does all things horror, and she does a lot of old school stuff, and then she does a lot of, she does a lot of newer films. She So I saw a little blurb of where she made a list of some of the better films that she had, she got that she had seen this year that came out, and this movie, Resurrection, was one of them. But I didn't know anything about it. I remembered when I rented it. I didn't even. I was like, oh, this looks cool. That was really it. I wasn't in the mindset of like, oh, I heard this is awesome. I'm gonna get this. So I went into it totally cold. I didn't see any trailers for it. Didn't know anything about it, or really, and then when I got it, I realized, oh no, wait, this is that movie I've heard a lot about that is supposedly really good, and it's called Resurrection, and it came out this year, and it's a thriller, like a psychological thriller, but it's definitely a horror film. It was directed by Andrew Seman, and it was also written by Andrew Seman. And it's just got an incredible cast. Rebecca Hall, she's a fantastic actress. I first came across her quite a few years ago. She was in one or two Woody Allen movies, definitely not horror films, and she's been in a whole bunch of movies since then. But she's a really great actress. She's been really prolific the last couple of years. Tim Roth, I mean, the iconic Tim Roth from Reservoir Dogs. Geez, I mean, such a great actor. Reservoir Dogs, The Hateful Eight, Pulp Fiction, obviously. Probably most well known for his role in Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs. Two of the most iconic Quentin Tarantino movies. He's also done all kinds of movies. He's a really great actor, really versatile. I think he's kind of like a legendary actor, or a modern day legend as far as his ability. And I feel like he's a real chameleon. He can really. He was in a movie a couple of years ago called, which I again never heard anything about, but I just thought it was such an awesome movie. This movie called Loosh, and it's a thriller, and it's centered on this son that he adopts, and all of these things that happen, and his a lot of situations that happen to him while he's in school, and then things that he's involved with are really kind of questionable whether they're legal or not, and what he's trying to do. But Tim Roth is in that film. He plays the father, and it's a melodrama essentially. But just such an awesome movie. Totally underrated. Totally underrated. And also another actress who I had never heard of, Grace Kaufman plays the daughter, plays Rebecca Hall's daughter, which I had never seen before. I never heard of her before, and it's really centered on. I feel like the movie is really centered on, to a degree, like trauma and mental illness. And it's one of those great films. Like there's a theme that happens a lot, and you see it a lot in films of where you know subjective, objective reality, and versus reality. Whether somebody is experiencing something strictly in their head, or it's actually something that's happening in reality. And this film very much deals with that kind of thing, but it has a very original take on it. I feel like it gives you something new. Incredibly, and again, I never went into this when I sat down to watch this film. I went into it completely cold, didn't know anything about it, and it was funny because I watched it. I started watching it really late at night when I first started, and I finished it last night. But I started watching it after I got home from my folks. And I started really late. I started a little bit too late. I generally don't like to start movies too late, just because like I'm a night person. But generally, I don't like to start movies too late because you get tired, and maybe your focus and concentration isn't quite there. So I typically will watch movies in the early part of the night. But sometimes I'll watch a couple and I'll keep going. But generally, I don't start a movie, uh, you know, at like 1 o'clock in the morning because a little bit fatigued or whatever. But I started watching Resurrection late one night after being out, and I was tired. I was tired, and I was a little bit fatigued. I was happy to be home, and I started watching it, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is really unusual. This is not what I expected, and I was digging it, but I wasn't like totally sure like where it was going, and I was like, oh, I should watch this another night at an earlier time when I'm a little bit more refreshed. So then the following night, I watched it. Actually, I watched it last night, Christmas night, and I watched it on the earlier side. And I didn't start. I was going to start it over again. Sometimes I do that. I have this weird tendency, or maybe it's a good tendency. But a lot of times when I watch a movie, if I watch it and it's on the later side, and I'm getting a little too tired and I'm going to bed, I'll stop it, and then the next day I'll watch it again. But a lot of the times, what I'll do, depending on the length of the movie, I'll maybe start it all over again from from the beginning the next time I see it. But then I was like, well, it's a longer-ish film. It's about 2 hours. So I was like, well, I'll go back quite a ways because I kind of remember it was still in my head. So I went quite a back. I went quite a back. I started it in the about 20 minutes in, and it was still in my head from what I had seen. So I watched it from that point on, and I was hooked to the freaking screen. Super disturbing movie, super creepy. It's definitely a psychological thriller, but it's definitely a horror film. I mean, there's and it also has the whole like talked about that too with the whole like body horror thing, like David Cronenberg, the whole kind of style that David Cronenberg created. There's definitely that element in this film too. It's there's a couple of scenes where it's generally gruesome as all hell. And I don't want to give anything away about what this movie is about because it's a really great surprise. And it's this thing of where, it's a suspense thriller, it's a psychological thriller, it's also a horror film, but it also has this thing of where, maybe there is some kind of supernatural element to it, so it's interesting. I kind of took what I kind of took away from the film was that it is this this portrayal of somebody who is going through this devastating situation where she went through just an unbelievable amount of trauma, and it's like it's really this psychologically you see this portrayal of what this woman has gone through and what it's caused her. And I kind of feel like at the end of the day, it's probably what it really is. It's about her, you know, her her own way of trying to come to grips and fighting this thing that she's dealing with. But it's the ending was just I thought the ending was one of the best closures of a movie I've seen in a while. It's so well shot. The cinematography is really great. The music is really really cool. The direction is great. It's and again, it's not predictable. Like you think it's going kind of in one direction. You have shades of something of where okay, this is happening, or this is quote unquote in like happening in real time or in reality. But then it switches over again, and then there's those lines are blurred. So it's very interesting. And then I think it doesn't have a lot of characters in the film. It's pretty much a fixed movie where there's really you know Emma Hall and Tim Roth are in the film a lot, and then her daughter. But that's really it. I mean, there's not a lot of other folks in camera or in the scenes. Although there are other characters that are part of the film. I think the writing is so great for this film because I care about everybody on screen, and it's also it gives you just enough and just enough like the character who is her boyfriend in it. He's only in the film for maybe 5 minutes, but he's great. He's really really great. There's one scene of where, without giving anything away, but there's one scene where the daughter is starting to realize that her mom is like basically losing her mind, and she's trying to help her, but they have no family. There's no father, there's no relatives local or where they live. So she reaches out to her boyfriend to like basically let's try to help mom, and maybe we can have like some kind of intervention. And there's this really amazing scene where Emma Hall goes back to the apartment after, because there's all these situations of where she stops going to work, and she basically is gone all day all night and leaves her daughter by herself, and she also is very controlling and doesn't let her daughter leave the house, and she doesn't let her socialize, and she won't even let her answer the door. She's kind of like, you're getting this impression that like her daughter is kind of her prisoner. So it's a really interesting dynamic with that going on. And then there's this whole thing where she basically, the main character Emma Hall, like she basically disappears. She doesn't show up to work anymore. She has this real high power job at this corporation, with lots of responsibility, and she's like a very strong willed woman, and she like disappears from work, and then she doesn't show up at home anymore. She comes home really late. She's not sleeping, and she's obviously some serious stuff is going down. And there's a scene where the daughter reaches out to the boyfriend, calls the boyfriend of like trying to help, and maybe they just devise this plan to like try to have an intervention, and they both come to the apartment, and then Emma comes home to after she's been gone like this to you have no idea where she's been going, and they have this intervention, and the acting is just tremendous. That scene is so amazing. I remember watching that scene, and there was a couple of scenes in that film I thought that the acting was so great that I went back and like rewatched those scenes with, and especially around Rebecca Hall. I mean, tremendous. And there's scenes with her daughter, with Grace Kaufman, and as well with Tim Roth, that are just some really great writing. But this film, I think, is definitely the best thing I've seen with Rebecca Hall. Just an incredible performance all around. So, yeah, super surprised, super excited, pumped, and that I discovered this movie. And and I've been since then I've been looking it up online, and I've seen that there has been a lot of reviews, but it's pretty pretty under the radar. I think this film. It just came out. I don't even. I think it was in the theater for a small amount of time, and it's definitely like a pretty big. It looks like it's a pretty big production film, so I'm surprised it wasn't maybe in more of a commercial sense, more talked about, or where I had seen more things about it. But really great movie. Really impressed. Just saw it last night. It just came out this year, so I highly recommend it. Resurrection, starring Emma Hall and Tim Roth, and 2022. Tremendous movie. If you're in the mood for a really great suspense thriller slash horror film, but in a very modern context, definitely check out this movie. So this is Jason Dean. Thanks again, everyone. I love that people are supporting this channel and listening to me talk about all the strange movies and things that I love. So if you like the stuff, like and subscribe to my channel. And we will see you next time. And have an awesome day. Peace.